Hey everybody, okay. It's been such a long day, so I want to end it with a really light topic, which is addiction, okay? Because that's like the perfect way to round out a day, right? Okay, so addiction, we've been dealing with this shit forever. Addiction is literally the oldest behavioral problem described in humanity. It's referenced 24 times in the Bible. We've been talking about it forever. And for whatever reason, it seems like we can't get a handle on it. Doesn't matter how long this thing has been going on. Like literally, it's a problem that feels like it's contemporary in every age. It gets bigger all the time. It's like somehow driving people crazy like ad nauseum. Why is that? The answer is technology. We have, since the beginning of time, also used technology to make things more addictive, you guys. Technology is how we make pot stronger. Technology is what allowed us to distill things in the first place. Technology is what enables drug makers to make their drugs more potent. And now, technology has become an addiction in and of itself. That's the twist. It's now become a thing that ends up not just being a tool for addiction, but actually something in and of itself. And in particular, this is interesting because it's not only the kind of intensity of that, let's say, but also the pace at which addiction is accelerating that's causing many people to notice. It's taken us 4,000 years of civilization to get to a 6% stable alcoholism in society rate. It has taken precisely 35 years for that same thing to occur with technology. So the rate of addiction with this is changing. And the reason for that, I would posit for you, are algorithms. And more specifically, artificially intelligent algorithms. So when I went to school, when I started my undergrad in 1992 at the University of Waterloo in Canada, I know I look much younger than you thought. You thought I was. We thought that like artificial intelligence was going to be this like super helpy technology, right? We'd have little bots that would like do stuff for us, and we'd be like, "Hey Alexa, go do this for us." And it actually turns out that in the intervening time period, science fiction thought it would be these bots that would like destroy us, but actually most of our effort into artificially intelligent algorithms went into video games. Now, there's a lot of dispute about whether or not video game AI is true AI, but just play along with me for 1 second. Video game manufacturers, particularly starting in 1978 with the release of Space Invaders, which you see in front of you, put artificial intelligence to a specific use. And that specific use was to make a game hard enough that it was interesting to you, but not so hard that you felt like quitting, and not so easy that it was boring. It was very specifically tuned to match your level of ability and thusly push you up a particular path of mastery. So many of you who deal in habit design will already recognize this particular frame that I just gave you, right? It's meant to challenge you to achieve something at the scale that you're capable of achieving, not too hard, not too easy, just enough to keep you engaged and keep you continuing to play, okay? So very specifically, because if you've ever thought about this, a computer could easily beat you in Space Invaders. If the enemy was programmed to its maximum potential, it would destroy you every single time because the computer, the algorithm, the game is aware of the placement of the next enemy, right? It can respond and defeat you immediately. So if all games were played at the computer playing at its maximum capability, no games against the computer AI would be winnable, and therefore none of them would be fun, right? So we have this massive investment in game AI, which leads us to a whole new sort of understanding that all starts in the 1970s, right? Because everything started in the 1970s, including myself. But actually, it turns out that this started much earlier. So the 1940 World's Fair, some engineers at Westinghouse put together an early computerized game called Nimatron. And Nimatron is playing a little game called Nim. Some of you might know it. It's like a stacks of stones moving game. And so they make this machine, and 50,000 people come to the World's Fair, and they play this game with the Nimatron in New York. Even then, the engineers understood that if the game played too well, people would not want to play it. They would not feel challenged appropriately by it, and they might feel offended by it. So they built in a delay in the game's movements so that it appeared more human and didn't feel insulting to the human player, such that it was able to out-execute the human. In 1940, engineers were already aware of the basic premise of behavior design to create long-term engagement. Now, while this has been going on, there's a huge debate about whether or not behavioral addictions, particularly technology-mediated addictions, are really a thing. If you saw the New York Times just the other day, some scientists wrote in and said video game addiction is not a real thing. People have argued whether or not is porn addiction a real thing, right? There's a huge debate going on. People cannot seem to agree. But lay people more or less believe that behavioral addictions are a real thing. Never mind that psychologists think that of the following addictions, video games, gambling, shopping, porn, sex, and screen time technology, the only one that is an officially recognized addiction of that list, by the way, is gambling. None of those other ones are officially recognized addictions in the United States. You cannot be a sex addict in the United States and get an official diagnosis of sex addiction because it does not technically exist in the United States, okay? So despite the official kind of like debate among psychologists, I think lay people would say, you heard that list, you'd say, yeah, you know what, I know some people who are addicted, I have a problem with that. Now, when we're measuring whether or not an addiction is a bad thing, whether or not there's a negative consequence for addiction, and I'll put this in like less polite terms, let's say, when people are judging you to decide whether or not the work you're doing is good or bad for society, they're gonna put your work through these three eye prisms, okay? They're gonna think about whether or not the behavior you've created is particularly intense. That is to say, what's the extremity of the individual behavior that it's creating? Are you getting people to sit in front of a slot machine and force them to wear a diaper so that they can pee while still playing? Is the individual intensity, is it intense? The second thing is the impact. How many people are influenced by the behavior that you create, okay? How many people are actually influenced? If it's a small thing, maybe less. And intent, right? What is the intent of your particular habit formation design? Are you intending to get people to use your product until they can't see straight and they fall asleep and they pass out in front of their computer? And the more intense each one of those three things are, the higher the amplitude of each one of those three things, I can promise you, and you know this from the case study of the tobacco business, you will not be judged kindly if the thing you're working on registers highly on those three eyes. And this is the reality of the conversation we find ourselves in today. And I can tell you, I was just like interviewed for 60 Minutes, and many of you have heard like Tristan Harris and Adam Alter and various people like that talking about the subject. I have a different opinion about it, which I'm gonna share with you, and some things we've learned about how to change behavior. But I have to tell you, the reality is, for those of you working in habit formation, you must be aware the spotlight is heading this direction, and your work is going to be scrutinized in a different way than it has been before, okay? The number one question I kept getting asked by Anderson Cooper the other day was, are people aware that there's a group of people out there designing products and services to be more addictive? Does the average person understand that? That was the number one question. He kept asking me that question, all right? Now, one thing I know the average person is aware of is that these two things are different, okay? So on one side, you have Toronto's former mayor, Rob Ford. Some of you might remember. I put him up mostly because I'm from Toronto, but also because he was quite the freak show. And on the other side, you know, you can see people using their phones, like we all get it, right? These things are similar, but they're not the same. And often conflating the two of them is a convenient shorthand for people. It's actually something that's become, you know, a great part of this debate, like, are these things the same? And I think the average person thinks they're not the same. They have some similarities, but they're not the same. But perhaps we're asking the wrong question as to whether or not, you know, are our products addictive? Is technology addictive? Is technology addiction a real thing? What if we took a step back from that question and asked a completely different question? And the question that I like to ask is about overuse. So not about addiction, but about overuse. And that question is different. That says, are you using this thing, are you using this product or service or experience more than you would like? Okay? Not, are you an addict? Are you broken? Is your life terrible? Should you submit to a higher power? None of those questions, okay? Just, are you using this thing more than you would like? Now, the data that I have up here is really hard to come by because nobody measures addiction or overuse across all behavioral and drug and alcohol spectra, but I've pulled it together for you. And what you can see right away, if you like look all the way down to the right, what you will see is that the number of people with an overuse disorder in the United States is greater than the population of the United States. And the reason for that is we don't know the overlap, but what we very clearly understand, what this data very clearly tells us, is that there's some percentage of the population that has comorbid overuse disorder, meaning they have more than one problem at a time. They both are drug addicts or recovering drug addicts and cigarette smokers, right? That's the most classic example. They're standing in front of AA and they're smoking cigarettes. That's the most classic example. But they're also potentially, screen time overusers and porn overusers, for example. And this is definitely rising to the level of crisis in the United States. Now, lest you think that this is a problem only for the younger generation, I present to you interesting data, and this is just one data point, but there's plenty. Nielsen, a particular survey that asked whether or not people felt like they had to compulsively look at their phones during meals. Like, you can't go through a meal without looking at your phone. And what you notice, I circled one particular bar, that's the boomer generation. And so this issue really does apply, broadly speaking, to all of the population. Now, at this point, you should be curious to know, why are people addicted to stuff? Why do people become addicted beyond just the mechanical or behavioralist view that we have, right? Press the pellet comes down. Okay, beyond operant conditioning, why do people develop addictions? And this is a source of great conflict in the behavioral psychology industry, in the psychology industry in general. There's one camp that thinks people become addicts because of trauma, okay? You were abused, you were abandoned, you were hurt when you were a child, and that's why you become an addict. And then there's this other group that thinks addiction is mostly a social disorder. Anxiety, boredom, or loneliness trigger you to seek comfort or solace in something, right? And then that thing becomes the replacement for the social interaction that you have. You've probably seen any number of TED Talks talking about one thing or the other. You've seen a bunch of science or one thing or the other. Let me tell you, science in the addiction space is a piece of fucking shit. Every time I see somebody put up a functional MRI study of the addict's brain or talk about an addiction research study, one thing that I'll tell you is they're never more than 100 people. If they're lucky, they're never more than 100 people. And for every one of those studies, there's one that proves the exact opposite thing. Video games are addictive, video games are not addictive. Okay? Social media causes people to feel bad, social media makes people feel great. This is the part of the brain that lights up when you're an alcoholic. This is the part of the brain that lights up when you look at porn. They must be the same. And this issue right here, why we become addicted, is such a source of conflict that it prevents us from actually being able to move forward. The other thing that prevents us from being able to move forward is our puritanical crap that tells us that the right way to treat addiction is largely an abstinence-oriented viewpoint. Okay? 12-step programs, for example, which many of you might be familiar with, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, that is the number one way we suggest to people to treat their compulsive overuse disorder. And despite having almost no evidence that any of those programs actually work, there is almost no research to demonstrate that those programs are efficacious, and they take a very strict view that you must be completely abstinent from the behavior. This is how we treat things. And abstinence, by the way, is generally speaking a pretty bad way to expect people to break a habit. Just say, wake up one morning and go, I'm never going to do this thing again. That's it. That's going to totally work. It's especially not going to work in the context where these are behaviors that you have to use. Isn't it nice that Khloe Kardashian gets to take a digital detox, right? She famously did this digital detox where she's like, I'm not going to use my phone anymore. And she was like, I'm off social media for 10 days. Isn't that nice? So you know how she did her digital detox? She has like an assistant who did her fucking Twitter for her. I'm serious. I'm serious. That is not a solution. And that is not a practical solution for any of us who are not Kardashians, number one. Even if you are as cute as a Kardashian, it's not a practical solution. And most of us have to interact with these technologies. And what are we supposed to do? Like stop having sex and like not look at the internet? Like this isn't going to work out, right? These are not viable solutions. So all of this is a big buildup for 18 months ago, I get together with some people, and I'm like, addiction sucks. I've had addiction in my family. I have lost groups of friends to addiction. Like, this is a crazy thing. Why can't we solve it? Why can't we bring the techniques that all of you have been instrumental in helping to make happen? Why can't we bring some of these techniques and take a completely new approach to treating addiction that starts with the technologist's view of how we might change behavior? Let's take the summary of all this learning in behavior change and apply it to this question. So we get together a great team. My co-founder, Adam Singer, used to be a lead engineer at Twitter, raise a couple $1 million from Founders Fund, hire a bunch of great engineers, open an office in Los Angeles, get some advisors from UCLA and Stanford and Columbia Medical Center, and then we build this product called Onward. And with this product, Onward, we enroll 1,400 porn overusers, so people who feel like they have a porn problem, in a study that we conduct for 4 months using our approach, okay? And now I want to share the results from this study, the things that we've learned in the process of changing people's behavior, and hopefully some of these things will help you design products in a better way and help you understand the landscape for how we might change our relationship. So here's how Onward works in a nutshell. And you can now, as of yesterday, download a screen time version of Onward, so something to help with screen time overuse and social media overuse in the App Store. So how Onward works, it's like you install it on your devices, you get a program delivered by an artificially intelligent chatbot, you get reports that show you all of your usage, so all the things that you're overusing, and then we build a predictive model of when you're going to act out, and we serve you up a just-in-time, clinically validated intervention that's then optimized for you and your particular situation. So instead of saying there's like one approach to this, right, which might be abstinence or mindfulness or motivational interviewing or cognitive behavioral therapy or connecting with a friend or physical activity, we say all of those things go into a carousel of behavior change ideas, and they're delivered to you in real time by an algorithm that watches what works and what doesn't for you and adjusts the program as you go, okay? With the goal that this machine learning algorithm eventually figures out the right set of interventions to help you change your behavior. So, just to set the stage that there's some interesting learning here for you, in this study, we were able to reduce usage in 90% of porn overusers. And we were able to get 51% of these people to stop using entirely in that 4-month period. For those people who chose not to stop using, so you have the option of stopping or not stopping, the people who chose not to stop using but do harm reduction reduced their usage by 26%. So we took a quarter of all their time usage off the table. And for people who felt triggered, so people who came into the app and said, I'm having an episode right now, I'm about to use porn, can you help me? We were able to stop 65% of those people from then using after that moment. So I know that most of you don't spend a lot of your time probably looking at addiction research, but this is not only a humongous study by addiction research standards, it's also like a very, very efficacious outcome. It's like shockingly efficacious. Like our researchers were like, what are you even talking about in this context? So it's actually been like really super cool and really super exciting. So we learned a few things that work, and part of my mission is to be transparent as possible and share data. So I want to talk about 3 new Fs that we found that have been very efficacious, and they're friction, feedback, and follow-up. So friction, first and foremost, when somebody's looking to act out in a compulsive way, first and foremost, we want to introduce a small amount of friction into that compulsive acting out so that they have a moment to reframe their decision-making. There's a bunch of research on this topic. Brief interruptions, brief delays. Friction is an important capability. What's important, though, about friction is this. You have to monitor the amount of friction that you introduce because anybody is free to leave this program at any time. Because you do not have control over their life entirely, right? You can't introduce so much friction that they choose to uninstall your product. You have to introduce only as much friction as will cause a little bit of a delay in their behavior so they can reframe their choices, and so you can help them avert that and do something different. And you want to introduce a different experience in there. So we built a very sophisticated content blocking technology that we call Smart Filter that does all this cool stuff and interrupts you and tries to send you different interventions in real time. A little bit of friction to get you thinking differently. Feedback. So we produce a completely passive report of the user's usage. We show them what their usage looks like in these nice charts. They see how they're doing. Every time they come into the app, it tells them, hey, this is your day yesterday. Here's how you're trending. Here are your results. And then follow-up, it's making sure that all the time there's a constant kind of check-in and return and accountability in the app. So the way that it works is every single day there's a daily check-in with your bot. It takes like just about under a minute. And this daily check-in is a highly efficacious moment for changing people's behavior. The check-in goes like this. Welcome. How are you feeling? Here's your data from yesterday. This is how it's different from before. How are you feeling? Can we commit to coming back tomorrow? Let's make tomorrow a better day. That's what that looks like. every day. And we're able to get, sometime between day 10 and 14, we're able to get people on a regular habit of doing this daily check-in. And the presence of this daily check-in alone is super predictive, is very, very highly predictive of being able to change behavior in a user. Now, you know this from the other side as well, right? You know that the daily grind that a user might come in tells you a great deal about whether or not they're engaged with the product, right? The presence in the daily check-in. But it also turns out that this daily check-in can be very powerful when accountability is there. I also talked about this prediction capability, right? The ability to see whether or not somebody is about to act out. And we are able to predict whether or not somebody's going to act out in porn usage about 80% better than chance. So you roll a dice, we can predict when you're going to act out about 80% better than chance. That algorithm is learning all the time. That prediction is actually very important for being able to deliver a just-in-time intervention to someone. So you think about it from your perspective. If you want to know when to deliver that message like, oh, do you want to buy dinner right now, right? What you would want to be able to do is predict when the person is going to be hungry. So just laying this out there, if I can predict when somebody's going to use porn, you can predict when somebody's going to be hungry. You may need a really smart set of algorithms, guys, and behavioral scientists and math nerds, but it absolutely can be done. Let me tell you what isn't going to work, asking people to predict when they are going to be hungry, because we asked users and how hungry they're going to be. We asked users to tell us, this is such a terrible plot, it's so hard to read, but I'm going to interpret it for you. We asked users to tell us how much porn they thought they used, and then we measured it empirically because everything we do is totally like observationally empirical. We don't ask people, other than how they feel at this stage. Everything else is empirical. Okay, so we can see how much people use and so on, and how much they're not using. So we asked people to tell us how much porn they thought they were using and how much porn they actually used. The dots across the top, the purple dots, that's how much people thought they were using. The orange line is how much they actually used. The green bars are the confidence interval of how reliable their actual usage is on a statistical error basis. And what you can see very quickly from this chart is the vast majority of people could not even remotely fucking predict how much porn they were using. In order for their prediction to be within the realm of statistical reliability, the purple dot must be in the green bar. Do you see how many people have a purple dot in the green bar? Almost nobody. You know what else is really interesting about this data? They all overestimated how much porn they were using, because that's the amplitude. Almost everybody who said they were a porn addict used more porn than they actually used. Now, I can't tell you that this will hold consistent for screen time or whatever, because typically on screen time data, I'm seeing the reverse pattern. But interestingly here, people who think they have a problem in porn particularly seem more sensitive to the time issue than we would expect them to be. And so many of these people would never even make it into a study of people who feel like they have a behavioral problem because their usage might be like 6 minutes per day. And a researcher would drop them from a study like hot potato, because that doesn't feel like a porn addict. That's like a person looking at porn, right? It doesn't feel like a lot. So we also learned some other stuff that only empirical data can tell us, and I'm not going to belabor the point, but I do want to tell you a couple things I think you'll find interesting. I think you'll find interesting that one of the first things that we saw when we actually had observable user data, so we're observing a very wide range of user behavior. Once we have observable user data, one of the first things we find out is that a porn addict or overuser who uses often throughout the day and a porn overuser who uses a lot in a given session, so a long session versus many sessions, are two completely different people. They're like not even the same population. One group of people is using porn often for a very small period of time. One group of people is using fewer periods of time, but for very long periods of time. Totally different people. They're very uncorrelated in the population. And the second thing that we figured out, which I think is very important for all of us in this room, you are 2.5 times more likely to act out using porn if you tell us that you're feeling anxious versus you tell us that you're feeling happy. And that's a little bit of common sense, but it's actually borne out in the data. You tell me you're feeling anxious, the odds that you're going to use porn in the next little while are 2.5 times higher than if you're feeling happy. So we know that affect affects outcome, and one key takeaway for you would be to get more affect data into your behavioral analysis regardless of what it is that you're using. The last kind of big takeaway that I have for you that I've learned is that people really trust bots more than they trust people. It was a hypothesis that I had, and the data and the feedback from users seems to be supporting this hypothesis, which is that in a touchy subject like addiction, we built a completely automated bot, and we tell people this bot, whose name is O is a non-judgmental, judgment-free, totally supportive coach for you to help you through this program. And people, first of all, really think O is real. Like they talk to O like it's a real thing. And they seem to feel very confident sharing very intimate things with O. And we're getting this consistent feedback from people. So one of the things about bots that's that seems less understood is that people seem to believe whatever characteristics you tell them the bot possesses, they don't seem to second guess that at first, unlike with a human. Like if the therapist says to you, I'm completely trustworthy, I'm not going to judge you, I'm here for you, depending on how trusting you are, you may not believe that. You may make the human prove to you that they do what they say. But people seem to give the bot advanced belief that whatever the bot is claiming to be, it really is. And that creates a unique opportunity for creating dialogue with the machine. Okay, so one of the ways that I think about the thing that we're doing with Onward, and perhaps something that would be interesting for some of you working on positive behavior change, is this idea of contract enforcement, okay? When a user is feeling particularly motivated to make a change in their lives, when they are feeling, you could see this as weak or strong, depending on how you view the continuum, that's a moment at which a user may be willing to make a contract for a behavior change. And that contract can take the form of signing up to go to the gym, right, in January, signing up for Onward, signing up for your product if your product is doing behavior change. At that moment, they want to do the contract. Most companies that do subscription-based business models, as we were talking about earlier, most companies that do subscription-based business models, and especially those in behavior change, they actually don't care to enforce the contract. They're happy to have you sign it, but they don't actually profit from you enforcing the contract with you, from getting you to come to the gym, right? It's something crazy like less than 10% of gym memberships are used more than once in a year. It's an insane number, right? Nobody there is doing the contract enforcement. You said you want to change your life. So I'm calling you up to tell you and remind you that you said you wanted to change your life. So we do things like the bot tells you that. You told me a couple of days ago that you wanted to change your life and change this behavior. So here's the thing that you said before. Here's a picture of your family. Here's an audio recording that you made. Here are the things that prove that when you said you wanted to make this contract, I'm here to enforce it with you. Now, later, at the moment when you're feeling weak and the moment that you want to act out and do the thing that I don't want you to do, I'm here to reinforce this contract. And I think this is an essential part of building trust with systems of behavior change, that you're capable of gathering that data and giving it back to the user when they need it from you. And so prediction also becomes important, right? It can't be on the wrong interval. It's got to be at the right interval. And also, I want to say to you, just from a philosophical standpoint, because this topic has been coming up a lot lately as far as designing for habit, I want to bring this up to you. One of the things that I'm troubled by in the movement to get people to do whatever you want to call it, let's call it ethical design, okay, or habit design that falls within certain parameters of behavior, is I always wonder what the practical implications are and the practical implementations are of something like ethical design. And it's to me seems really weird. It seems weird to suggest to me, to creators, to people making amazing products, that they should not make their products as amazing as possible, that they should not make them as engaging as possible. This would be like asking J.K. Rowling to make her books less good, because every time she put out a Harry Potter book, hundreds of millions of people gave up what they were doing for the weekend and sat down and read that book to the exclusion of everything else. Now, how would you as a creator, how do you as a designer of engagement tone that shit down, right? Your job, I think, and I certainly believe in the economy that we live in for sure, your job is to make the best possible products that you can, the best services you can, to create as much engagement as you possibly can with them. I promise you, creators of content, if you don't live in the content sphere, they don't try to restrict the quality of the engagement of their material. They make the best movies, video games, books, so on that they can. You too need to do that. But someone has to advocate for the user. Someone has to enforce the user's self-defined contract. Someone needs to help users curb their behavior if they feel like their behavior is overuse. I don't think that's incumbent on you, unless that's the business you want to be in. I don't think it's incumbent either on the government to tell people when they should or shouldn't be cut off. I know how I would react if Facebook decided to cut me off at one point, because it's like, hey Gabe, you've been looking at Facebook too much. I would find that paternalistic and weird. And I would also need some kind of like appeals process, because maybe I'm looking at Facebook a lot because I've been in the hospital for 6 weeks and I'm lonely and they don't know that. Or maybe because I have deep-seated social anxiety and this is how I interact with people and they don't know that. So the only viable way to create that tech-life balance, which is the concept that I talk about all the time, is for that advocacy to occur on the user side. And I want you guys to really think deeply about both how you make the best possible products and how you do that in an ethical way. I don't want you to ruin people's lives. But also, how you, if you're interested, get on board with the idea of helping users enforce their own contracts, helping users become their best selves. So to that end, and because addiction treatment and addiction recovery stuff is so shitty, and because this is how I want to do it, I am making available to you, and I will make available eventually to the public, but to you first, the validated results from our study with porn users. So you can see in detail what works and what doesn't for creating behavior change in the sphere of addiction recovery and helping people break their habits and enforce their own personal contracts and achieve tech-life balance. You can go to that URL. It's going to come down in a couple of days, and then we'll put it up again for the public later in bits and pieces. But for you, because it's important to what you do, you can go to that URL. You can download that work. Eventually, I hope to be able to make possible, in addition to this data and this transparency, and I'm happy to talk to any of you who want to talk about it and share whatever data I can for how to help people achieve this. Eventually, I want to make Onward even more open so that you can actually write behavior change programs on top of Onward and allow Onward to help people achieve those behavior changes that they want. But in the meantime, I'm hopeful that you all will go out and continue to make great products and services to create great and meaningful engagement with people, and that you take a moment to think about and support initiatives which help users achieve their tech life balance. Thank you.